This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about across the continent and beyond. Let's start the program, though, as we always do, with a run through the markets. So a set of positive numbers coming through today, not particularly impressive on the NSE 20, marginal gain there of about 1% or so, but we're still at about 2,800 or so points. Yesterday, we spoke about talks between two Kenyan lenders, which, if approved, will create the third biggest lender in the region with an asset base of about $4.4 billion using the 2017 numbers. Today, big spike in one of those bank shares, NIC up 32.5% to about 29 US cents, and that has pared its year-to-date losses down to just 2.2%. We'll see how that plays out next week on Monday. Here's what's coming up tonight. Oil prices are heading up as producers agree to cut output. We'll have a preview of what you should expect from the Africa 2018 Forum from Sharm el-Sheikh. And we'll introduce you to the entrepreneur who's taking away the headache of searching for affordable housing in Lagos. All right, then let's start with the day's argument. Brent is up about 5% to around 63 or so dollars a barrel. That was following the deal that was brokered in large part by the third largest oil producer and a non-OPEC member, Russia. Now, the cut is much higher than the 1 million barrels cut that had been anticipated, with OPEC members apparently now taking a much bigger share of that cut at about 800,000 barrels per day of output. The price of crude has fallen by nearly a third since October, and the US President Donald Trump had demanded on Twitter, as he so often does, that OPEC make oil even cheaper by refraining from any output cuts. All right, then, so let's get you a perspective on this subject from Africa's largest oil producer. Deji Badmus joins us now live from Lagos. Deji, good to see you. So to what extent is Nigeria taking part in these cuts that were announced earlier today? Because of that 1.2 million barrels per day of cuts planned, 800,000 of that has to be handled by OPEC. Libya is exempt. So what's Nigeria taking on?
Well, Ramah, as you know, the quotas have not been released yet, so we wouldn't know to what extent now Nigeria would be taking part in the cuts. But obviously, since Nigeria is not among the countries exempt from these cuts, it definitely means Nigeria would have to take some cuts. But not until the quotas are announced, and we'll then have a clearer picture of what Nigeria's take will be on the cut. But obviously, Nigeria will definitely be taking part in the cut.
Indeed. So let's look at the supply side over the medium term at least. The Total-operated Uganda oil field, that's due to come online sometime next year. It adds another 200,000 barrels per day worth of output to Nigeria's total output. Shell is also supposed to be making a final investment decision on the Bonga Southwest Deepwater oil field. What are the big projects that are due to come online or to be developed in Nigeria in 2019?
Well, Ramah, I think those are the two biggest projects you've just mentioned. The problem we have in the oil industry in Nigeria is that there's a dearth of investment. And part of that, some stakeholders in the oil industry would tell you, is because of the fact that we still do not have the petroleum industry bill in place. Of course, we know the National Assembly, that's Parliament, not quite long ago, passed what is called the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill, because the Petroleum Industry Bill itself has been broken into parts. But even the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill that was passed by Parliament has not been signed into law yet by the President. As a matter of fact, we understand the President has actually returned that part of the bill now to Parliament to make some corrections before it will be passed. So the absence of a new bill now to govern the petroleum industry, we understand, is delaying investment in the industry in Nigeria. So with the exception of the Egina oil field, which of course the Egina now that'll be coming on stream sometime in January or February, and then as a matter of fact, a final investment decision has not yet been made on the Bonga. So, I mean, Shell hasn't made a final decision. We understand Shell might be delaying to wait and see what the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill looks like before it makes a final decision. So all of that is really impacting the industry, the oil industry in this country. So we do not have at the moment those huge investments that you'll be looking at, with the exception of, Bonga and Egina.
Indeed, of course, with the budget for 2019 coming up, that might the legislation for the oil sector might get pushed back. One last question for you. Nigeria used to be able to reliably produce over 2.2 million barrels of crude a day, but from 2016 to date, its output has only gone up by 200,000 or so barrels a day. It's now at about 1.7 or so million barrels of crude a day. What's happening with Nigeria's oil output?
Well, to be candid, Ramah, at the core of the problem, several reasons, but one of the most identifiable problem would be security. I mean, you know what happens in the Niger Delta. You have the issue of sabotage, but even though it's been quiet now for a while in that area, but to a large extent, you could blame sabotage for one of the reasons. I mean, it forces most of these IOCs now to shut down their operations, for instance, declare force majeure and what have you. I mean, sometime this year, a major oil pipeline was shut down. As a matter of fact, the main export terminal was shut down. I think it wasn't until a few months ago that it came back on stream. Now, when you add that problem to the fact that you don't have huge investments in the oil industry, you get a clearer picture of why Nigeria is finding it difficult to pump up to, what it used to pump in the past, say 2.2 million, 2.3 million barrels per day. So it's just what it is. The security problem has been taken care of, but of course, when you have shut-ins like the one we had in the past, it takes a bit of time before things come back to normal. And you also have leakages there. I mean, sometimes, of course, the oil companies now will blame that on sabotage. So all of those problems, you put all of that together, you begin to get a clearer picture why Nigeria is finding it difficult to pump crude now at its optimum capacity. So when these problems are addressed, and of course the investment decisions are made, the huge investment decisions now are made, then you'd begin to see the figures go up. For instance, we expect the figures to go up by January or February when oil now begins to roll out from Egina, because we understand Egina is basically why the country is finding it difficult to pump what it ordinarily would pump in the past without any qualms.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Daji Badmusser live in Lagos. Thank you. Now, still on the subject of oil, the UK-based oil explorer Tullow Oil is seeking partners in its bid to acquire a new oil block in Ghana. The oil explorer is already the lead operator of 2 fields in the country. That includes the flagship offshore Jubilee field. Cumulative output, about 160,000 barrels of black gold every day. Now, Tullow had to delay the development of its second field due to its maritime border dispute between Ghana and her neighbour to the west, Cote d'Ivoire. On to North Africa now. Egypt is all set to host the Africa 2018 Forum in the resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh, right on the Red Sea, this weekend. This is the 3rd edition of the event. Youth and women will be firmly in focus. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has this preview.
Leaders, heads of governments and states have been invited to the Africa 2018 Forum in Sharm el-Sheikh. They will be joining a host of business executives and financial institutions at the Red Sea resort city. The Africa Forum in its 3rd year is an economic gathering. Governments and businesses work together on means to upgrade intra-African trade and investments. This year's edition will shed light on 2 major issues as well: women empowerment and young entrepreneurs. A whole day of sessions will be dedicated to hosting experts and successful women and entrepreneurs. They will discuss their stories of success and the efforts needed for empowering women and youth in Africa. The Africa 2018 Forum will also discuss the latest steps taken by governments and states to establish the long-sought dream of having an African continental free trade area. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Right, then let's start our company news wrap in the aviation sector. The low-cost carrier FastJet says it's only capable of operating for another 7 days. This comes after the troubled airline planned for additional funds and equity refinancing in November. It aimed at the time to raise its equity capital by at least $40 million. Fastjet management said discussions with stakeholders so far have been positive, but there's no guarantee of a successful outcome. The Commercial Bank of Africa's possible merger with NIC, the National Industrial Credit Bank, will make it the biggest rearrangement of Kenya's banking landscape in a decade. The new entity will have about $4.4 billion in total assets based on their disclosures from September, effectively overtaking the current number 3 Cooperative Bank. Now, the new bank will also be the third largest lender by assets after KCB and Equity. Their asset bases are valued at about $6.7 and $5.5 billion respectively as of September. Speaking of lenders, the South African bank Group has set new targets to raise its return on equity by around 4% by 2021. Absa is currently South Africa's third largest lender. It's trying to carve out a name for itself as a standalone African bank after separating from its parent, that's the UK's Barclays Bank, in 2017. Now, the South African bank's new strategy includes a plan to double its market share across the continent to 12%, starting by getting into the Nigerian market. And still in South Africa, the country's financial regulator is investigating 7 trading accounts that sold Steinhoff International shares. The Financial Sector Conduct Authority is looking for evidence of insider trading. The shares were bought in the weeks leading up to the global retailer's disclosure of accounting irregularities and subsequent share price collapse about a year ago. Steinhoff shares have lost more than 96% of their value since the accounting scandal erupted. That's a run for your company headlines. We're about 15 minutes into the hour. There's plenty more content coming up. We'll be back shortly after this.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Nigeria once again. The Federal Executive Council over there has approved the proposed estimate for the 2019 budget. Now, it isn't clear yet, though, when the President, Muhammadu Buhari, will present said budget to the National Assembly. 2018, remember, is almost over, and analysts are warning that the late submission and approval of these estimates will again affect the implementation of the 2019 spending plan. Here's Phil Ihaza with the details.
The National Assembly is expected to receive a copy of the 2019 budget proposal next week. The review and ratification by both chambers of the House usually takes between 5 and 6 months. This means the budget is unlikely to be signed into law before the middle of next year. There are concerns over the country's inability to implement a January to December budget cycle, which experts warn may have a negative impact on the economy in 2019.
Delay in Nigerian passage of budgets is going to affect a lot of fiscal policy and fiscal decisions. Before now, Nigeria is used to this type of poor late presentation, which also leads to late implementation. Truth is, Nigeria is supposed to present budget to the National Assembly last week of August or first week of September.
In the past decade, the earliest the budget was presented to lawmakers was in October 2012 and passed 4 months later in February 2013. There are more than 85 million Nigerians living in extreme poverty, and analysts believe the 2019 budget should be targeted at developing human capital.
As an economist, I believe strongly that 2019 budget should focus on education, it should focus on health, and also elevating people from poverty, among others. We should make sure that our capital expenditure goes beyond our recurrent expenditure. That would mean that we've started to put our country on the right track.
Although the details haven't been made public yet, Budget Minister Udo Udoma says the government is proposing a $23.6 billion spending plan for 2019, about 6% lower than this year. The government says it's also going to reduce its levels of borrowing to finance the budget, a pattern that's become the norm in recent years. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
On to Ethiopia now. The authorities are saying that 7 new industrial parks are ready to go online. These industrial zones are expected to attract hundreds of millions of dollars in investment if they are successful. CGTN's Girum Chala takes a closer look at what they have to offer.
The new industrial parks will be situated in 4 locations across Ethiopia. They are said to be fully equipped with world-class features and have the added bonus of being eco-friendly.
In total, 5 industrial parks are awaiting for labor-intensive manufacturing for export. And other 2 industrial parks, infrastructure. One is, we call it Bolelemi 2. The other one is Kilinto, both in the outskirts of Addis. Their infrastructure construction is completed, so soon will be inaugurated. All this 5 plus 2, 7 are built by the government industrial park developer called Industrial Parks Development Corporation.
The cities of Dire Dawa, Jimma, Bahir Dar and Addis Ababa will house the new developments, bringing significant economic benefits to surrounding communities. Authorities say construction is about 80 to 99% complete.
The main focus is exports and creation of employment. These are the 2 pillars that we are promoting highly, and textile and garment. For example, in Bolelemi 2, we are encouraging textile mills, not garment. In Kilinto, again in Addis, we will have one of the biggest pharmaceutical manufacturing industrial park dedicated only for human medicine production.
The industrial parks are dedicated to specific sectors such as textile and apparel, leather goods, pharmaceuticals and agro-processing. Most of the developments are partnerships with Chinese investors and the Ethiopian government.
There are also other private industrial parks, mainly owned and developed by Chinese. So we are looking for more industrial park developers and also companies to invest in this specialized and sustainable industrial parks. When I say sustainable, environmental, social, sustainability, all are ensured.
The government has offered a number of incentives to encourage investment. These include exemption from income tax and import duties. Global fashion brands such as Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger and others are already manufacturing and sourcing textiles from Ethiopia. With these new industrial parks, the country looks set to become Africa's largest manufacturing hub by 2025. Group Jara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Still in Ethiopia, China is encouraging the country to develop its coffee industry even further, partly in order to meet growing domestic demand for that beverage in China. According to the China Coffee Association, the Asian giant bought 250,000 tons of the beverage last year, but very little of that came from producers here in Africa. As CGTN's Coletta Njohi now reports from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia wants a much larger market share of China's coffee market.
This Ethiopian exporter says China is an untapped market. Moplako Trading sends 15 massive containers of coffee to China annually and believes that's only the beginning.
Many people are consuming coffee in China, like in Beijing and Shanghai. The interest of getting Ethiopian coffee is rising there. So if we do better and supply better coffee, of course, the business with China will increase. We shall get more demand.
So far in 2018, China has imported nearly 38,000 tons of coffee, but only 2,500 tons come from Ethiopia. Countries like Vietnam take the lion's share, supplying 49% of all coffee consumed in China.
To occupy a place in this Chinese market, Ethiopia should carry on long-term promotion activities. This will take many years for brand distribution and market cultivation.
The government says its ability to meet international demand is hampered by inconsistent quality and quantities.
There are challenges to get fair price for our production competing in the international market. Coffee production is contested by pests and diseases resulting from climate change. In addition, coffee growers, especially smallholders, are vulnerable to price fluctuation.
Ethiopia produces up to 700,000 tons of coffee annually, earning around $500,000 from exports. But the 10 million people working on the production line see very little of this money, which could be part of the reasons behind the inconsistencies in quality and quantity of beans. In addition, some buyers believe marketing is also a stumbling block. To overcome this, Chinese businesses are willing to help Ethiopia partner with recognized retailers to increase distribution. Ethiopia is also being advised to upgrade its production services to boost the sales of processed coffee, which has a far greater retail value than the beans it currently exports. Coletta Njohi, CGTN in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
As you can tell, this is a fairly heavy bulletin on commodities, so we're still on coffee issues. Uganda plans to expand its coffee industry by including the sector in the country's tourism market. CGTN's Isabel Nakiri now reports that involves everything from farm tours to festivals and even a museum dedicated to coffee.
A taste of locally brewed coffee. This is what Uganda is planning to include in its tourism offerings. Promoters see it as a way of maximizing profits from the country's biggest export.
On top of selling the commodity coffee, you will also be able to earn from the tourism that goes with coffee. And this will be further motivation to the farmer to be able, one, to produce more, address productivity, but there will also be a huge market for the coffee because some of the tourists who come here had never been in a position to appreciate the values that go with Ugandan coffee.
Uganda is taking its cue from countries in Latin America such as Colombia, which have made coffee tourism big business. Uganda exports about 288,000 tons of coffee a year.
We are trying to address best practices of coffee growing because a tourist would like to come and see how best you are looking after your farm, how best you are looking after your coffee that you are drying in your backyard.
As tourist numbers increase, local consumption also needs to grow to better market the product. Uganda's top tourist attractions are its wildlife and vast natural resources, bringing in about $1.4 billion annually. Now the country hopes to add coffee, increasing earnings in both the tourism and coffee production sectors. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
The 45th annual meeting of the heads of tax authorities in East Africa has wrapped up in the Kenyan capital. Representatives from Burundi, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda and Kenya all attended that two-day event. The summit's aim is to harmonize tax policies across the East African community. Now, this end goal over the long run is to make the region a single harmonious investment destination with, at the very least, common tax policies. The 5 East African countries also saw revenue collection rise in the first quarter of the 2018-2019 fiscal year by anywhere between 5.3 to 17.8%. The countries agreed to deepen revenue mobilization by using tools like third-party data to drive a lot more taxpayer recruitment. They also aim to increase their ability to investigate and punish acts of corruption and tax evasion.
The meeting discussed pertinent issues that affected operations and agreed on the following key ones. First is to effectively facilitate trade and enhance compliance. Revenue authorities agreed, 1, to develop a common customs management system to replace the independent systems in use at the individual states. This will enhance information sharing and help prevent cross-border fraud.
The objective of the harmonization is to also create a conducive business environment We do now have companies that operate across East Africa. They don't just operate in one member state. And they always complain about having to deal with vastly different rules and procedures for taxation in each state. And even if you may fail to harmonize, for example, a tax rate, but do you have the same system of taxation across these countries? It makes it easy for the companies to plan their investments and to plan things like labor movement and so on. So for example, for me in Uganda, I'm always dealing with executives of companies who are coming from Kenya or from Tanzania and so on. So, and the companies they're managing are multinational.
Now, in Kenya, the transportation sector over here accounts for more than half of all CO2 emissions produced in this country every year. A Finnish company is hoping to kill two birds with one stone. It's hoping to address the emissions problem, but also provide employment opportunities at the same time. CGTN's Ramah Nyang explains how.
Like any other ride-hailing service, all you need is a smartphone to download the app. But there's a fundamental difference between Nopia rides and other taxi services in Nairobi, such as Uber and Taxify.
So basically we are offering Uber type of service, taxi hailing service, with our app that is called Nopia. But it's based on clean energy and clean transportation. So all our vehicles are electric vehicles.
The World Bank estimates more than half of all carbon dioxide emissions produced annually in Kenya are from the transport sector. Nopia uses electric vehicles, the first of their kind in East Africa, to provide an eco-friendly ride with zero emissions. Chris Kiare drove a petrol-powered cab for 3 years before switching to Nopia. The difference, he says, is immeasurable.
This car doesn't need servicing, no oil filters, no plugs, nothing. Just the charging and you're to go.
And in Nairobi's seemingly never-ending traffic, Kiare says he earns more with Nopia.
When I used to work in other platforms, half of my earnings, I used them on fuel.
For the driver, there are two things that he needs to look out for in an electric vehicle. One is the battery percentage, two, the range. For the client, well, the first thing that I noticed when I got in was it's very, very quiet. And it also makes me feel good about myself because I'm doing my bit for the environment. EcoRent Africa, the mother company, has installed charging points at two high-end shopping centres in Nairobi. It takes between 40 minutes and 2 hours to fully charge the battery. After the success of the pilot program introduced in August, the company is ordering more electric vehicles and looking to expand its services.
So in this scenario, we would charge the vehicles with the clean solar energy. And if for some reason grid power goes down and shopping malls such as this one require electricity, we could provide it from our vehicles.
And as more Kenyans switch to electric cars, EcoRent says it may consider offering a charging service in the future. Ramah Nyang, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
It's 18:28 GMT, time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be looking at Theresa May's options ahead of the parliamentary vote on the Brexit deal next week, Tuesday. And China, Japan and South Korea want to accelerate talks on a free trade deal.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live, Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's run through the stories making your headlines at this hour. A new report by the World Health Organization says that road traffic deaths have risen to 1.3 million a year. Road injuries, in fact, are the leading cause of death among young people between the ages of 5 and 29. This report indicates that not a single low-income country has demonstrated a reduction in road deaths. Now, the risk of a road traffic death goes up by a factor of 3 in low-income countries, according to data from the WHO. Suspected militiamen have killed at least 18 civilians in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo near the town of Beni. According to a local army spokesperson, the civilians were killed in 2 separate attacks on Thursday night. These attacks took place near the epicenter of an Ebola outbreak. Repeated attacks by armed groups on civilians, Congolese soldiers, UN peacekeepers. These have all combined to hamper efforts to contain the epidemic, which right now is the second worst in history. Elsewhere, the 7th meeting of ministers concerned with women affairs has called on IGAD member states to adopt the Africa Plan 2063. It's designed to promote gender equality and the empowerment of African women, among other things. The meeting was also attended by IGAD member governments, donors, development partners, and intergovernmental organizations. Sudan says it is fully committed to the decisions, policies, and strategies of IGAD. And finally, further protests are expected in France over the weekend. After an increase in fuel taxes, the French Interior Minister Christophe Castaner says that the 3-week-old protests over the taxes have essentially spawned a monster. The government says it will scrap the unpopular taxes from its budget, but this growing discontent has pushed citizens to protest over other issues like education reform. That's a run through your headlines. Now then, let's move on to Asia, shall we? Top negotiators from 3 countries, China, Japan and South Korea, have met in Beijing to discuss trade and investment. Representatives from 3 nations have agreed to advance the consensus reached by their leaders to accelerate talks on a free trade agreement. CGTN's Liu Yang reports.
Negotiations for a trade deal between China, Japan and the Republic of Korea are underway in Beijing. Together, the 3 economies account for more than 20% of global GDP. China's Vice Minister Wang Shouwen emphasized the goal of talks.
We have good reason to believe it is time for the 3 countries to accelerate CGTN negotiations. The 3 countries have common political will to accelerate CGTN negotiations. China, Japan, Korea are closer neighbors and complementary in industrial strength. Further opening up domestic markets through a free trade agreement will enable more efficient allocation of resources among our economies.
Some experts argue as trade protectionism and unilateralism are on the rise around the world, globalization and the free trade system are under attack, and the risks and the challenges are intensifying.
I would like to emphasize the importance of CGTN for responding to rising global protectionism and also promoting international trade and supply chain. If we succeed in further strengthening economic integration through the FTA among our 3 countries, which account for 1/4 of the global GDP, we will be able to turn the challenges that we are currently facing into new opportunities.
The establishment of the FTA is seen as one of the important paths to promote economic integration in East Asia.
Japan's determination to exercise leadership as a standard bearer of free and fair trade is unwavering in the multilateral, regional, and bilateral context. First and foremost, the multilateral free trade order based on the WTO system should be further strengthened, including through its reform.
The 3 sides agree that FTA between is conducive to accelerating economic integration in East Asia, promoting further integration of regional industrial chains and bringing new opportunities to enterprises of the 3 countries. A joint declaration issued after a trilateral leaders meeting in May said that they should look to accelerate their FTA negotiations. They said that they were looking to reach a comprehensive, high-level, and a mutually beneficial free trade agreement. Then last month, in his keynote speech at the opening ceremony of the China International Import Expo, Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed accelerating the negotiation process even further. The trilateral talks for a China-Japan ROK free trade agreement launched in November 2012. This latest round of talks in Beijing is proof the countries are committed to achieving a deal. Liu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
All right, then let's take a look at Brexit now. The UK Prime Minister, Theresa May, she's said to be weighing a plan to postpone this must-do vote on her Brexit deal. The British Prime Minister is being urged by her allies in the Conservative Party to postpone the crucial vote on the divorce agreement she's been negotiating for the last couple of years with the European Union, amid predictions from left, right and centre that she will lose and lose badly. That defeat would then put the UK on course to crash out of the EU without a deal and perhaps even trigger fresh attempts to kick Mrs May out of power. The UK is set to leave the EU formally on the 29th of March next year. All right, then let's get you the latest on this. Richard Bestick has been following the developments up in the UK. He joins us now live from London. So, Richard, is a vote in the House of Commons, is that still set for next week, Tuesday, despite all the opposition we've seen to the deal so far?
Well, at the moment, and Ramah, it's probably best to stress at the moment, the vote is going through, although some, as you were suggesting, very influential individuals inside Parliament are suggesting to the Prime Minister that it might be a good idea to postpone it rather than stage a political charge of the Light Brigade, because the parliamentary arithmetic makes defeat about as near to a certainty as you can get in politics. And it's not just a defeat, it's the scale of the majority expected to vote against her withdrawal agreement. Estimates of up to 90 votes and are expected to be the majority against her. Theresa May's efforts to win over the public for her Brexit deal don't appear to be doing any better. More than 60% of people think leaving the European Union on the terms she's negotiated would be a bad outcome for Britain. And that's according to the pollsters Ipsos Mori. So the pressure is there to postpone the vote, but so far the Prime Minister says she is going to plough on.
Indeed, Margaret Thatcher does come to mind. This lady's not for turning. But the government's also reportedly telling supermarkets to hold as much inventory as they can in case of a no Brexit deal. Or no deal Brexit rather. So what would a no deal crash out of the EU look like come March next year?
Well, you mean apart from the political, diplomatic and economic chaos that many say would ensue from Britain departing the EU without an agreement? Well, it's not just food that's causing concern, there's medicines as well, and so-called just-in-time parts for the motor industry. The government released a report today saying that it anticipated massive tailbacks of trucks at Britain's main ports, in particular Dover, for about 6 months after Britain left without a deal. Look at it this way. More than half Britain's foods are imported, and while Britain's supermarkets depend on a continual and uninterrupted supply of stock, stockpiling might help, but the system is geared up to holding stock for just a matter of days. So the reality is, Ramah, that the capacity for stockpiling on a significant level just isn't there. And when you look at the possibility of stockpiling medicines with their short shelf life, it's even more complex and potentially hazardous.
Indeed. One last question for you, Richard. So given the likely disaster that the government would face in a vote on the Brexit deal next week, assuming it happens next week, is a second referendum a bit more palatable at this point, or does that idea still run into a lot of opposition?
Well, you'd think it would be more palatable, wouldn't you? Parliament can't decide, so the obvious thing is put the question back to the people. But here's the rub. The Prime Minister's dead set against it, so you'd first have to get rid of her before there was any chance of putting it before Parliament. Then there might not be sufficient votes among members of Parliament to secure a second referendum. And Ramah, just one more stat, in case you thought Brexit wasn't complicated enough. You know that Ipsos Mori poll I was talking about just a few minutes ago? Well, if the vote overturns Theresa May's withdrawal agreement Tuesday, 20% say they would call for a second referendum. And get this, exactly the same number are saying the UK should leave the EU without a deal. So a second referendum is far from a done deal, although more people are now talking about it.
Indeed. Richard Bestick there in London is always helping us try and figure out if Brexit really does mean Brexit. We'll leave it there. Now, onto the aviation business. UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones, if you prefer, are expected to become big sellers again over the holiday period. But, of course, they can be rather dangerous. As CGTN's Phil Lavelle tells us, even in the US, there's a lot of confusion about the laws that govern their use.
You can't escape them, which could be a problem. Drones have been involved in many near misses with aircraft like helicopters.
But these things are expected to be big sellers once again this holiday season. The eyes in the sky are here to stay.
There's such a high adoption now, just people buying these for fun or for their professions as well.
Amazon is ambitious about using them for deliveries. They get real estate agents beautiful shots of their properties.
It's the closest thing to being able to fly in real life without being like a full-blown airplane pilot.
And for those who love a gadget, they're also a pretty cool toy.
Why are these things so popular?
I really think it's having that unique perspective of the area around you, whether it's your own backyard or if you're traveling and you're checking out a new place, being able to get that bird's eye view. That new perspective of the world there's nothing really quite like it.
The problem many have, though, is navigating the legal aspects of what is and what isn't allowed.
Currently, it's actually very difficult for the average consumer to really know what rules and regulations they need to follow.
And that's because rules can vary from city to city.
In national parks, you're not allowed to take off. But if you take off from outside of the national park, you're technically allowed to fly over it.
Certain beaches allow them, for example, this one does. Others are a big no-no, like the same line of coast just a few miles north. Some of the rules, or lack of them, can be pretty hazy, especially for first-timers.
The problem is, you don't know what you don't know. So when people get their drone for the first time, there's really no packaging or labels like a Surgeon General's warning that talks about the safety hazards or regulations required to fly a drone. Also, there really isn't equivalent of a drone driver's license, so there's no formal training before you can unpack it and get the drone up in the air.
There are several apps to help, the idea being they will tell you if you're in a no-fly zone. Others will go film your shots for you.
Our API will programmatically check the airspace above that building and all of its coordinates.
This startup, Dronebase, for example, working directly with the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. Think of it as an Uber for drones, taking requests for filming, checking all the rules and regulations, then dispatching its own drones to do the work.
We'll typically just ask them to sort of mark where the boundaries of that building are.
Boss Dan explaining that even the big airports like Los Angeles, LAX, allowing drones much nearer than they used to with conditions.
Around LAX, last year, for example, there's just a 5-mile radius all around LAX that was restricted airspace. They've reimagined that airspace now where, okay, if you are right off the runway, that's still no. There's no allowable height. However, if you go, let's say 500 feet, stood off from the runway, maybe they'll approve you to fly to 50 feet. A mile away, maybe they'll approve you to fly 200 feet. Last year we said no to 30% of all drone flights, whereas this year we're saying no to less than 1%. So it's been a really helpful change.
A few rules are clear. Hobbyists must stay below 400 feet. Drones should always be kept in line of sight, and they should not be used above ongoing disasters like wildfires, where they may hinder emergency response. But this is ultimately new technology.
The regulations always take time. They always are kind of slower to follow as the pace of the industry grows.
And the rules, like that technology, are still evolving. Phil Lavelle, CGTN, Los Angeles.
All right then, private jets, flying palaces, whatever you call them, they're basically a way of signaling that someone has made it, pretty much. Now these days, the most expensive and well-designed private jets are produced by a handful of manufacturers. Gulfstream, Embraer over in Brazil and Bombardier over in Canada. Now for the world's wealthiest, these planes do a lot more than just fly around. They are state-of-the-art planes that offer a lot of interesting tech. They're basically somewhere between a palace in the air and an office in the air as well. So who owns the most expensive one? How much did it cost? Most expensive of that lot in 2018 belongs to a Saudi prince, Al Walid bin Talal Abdulaziz Al Saud. He runs a billion-dollar investment company, Kingdom Holding. It's based in London. Its stock is listed in Saudi Arabia. He's got stakes in News Corp, Citigroup, Al Nahar, Al Diyar, two daily newspapers published in Lebanon. In 2011, Al Walid bin Talal also acquired a $300 million stake in Twitter. All right, then let's make a quick run through commodity prices now for you. So as soon as that deal, news of that deal rather, just cut output by 1.2 million barrels of crude broke out, oil did rebound. 16:17 GMT, Brent crude was about 63.26, up 5% on the day. That brings crude effectively back into positive territory on a year-to-date basis. Iran, Venezuela, Libya, all exempted from this round of cuts. Saudi Arabia, the big swing producer in OPEC, will be cutting output by 400,000 barrels this month and then follow that up with another 500,000 in January, according to its oil ministers. The Russian oil minister put it, Saudi Arabia is taking on a much bigger part of the cut relative to its output. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be introducing you to an entrepreneur who's taking away the headache of searching for affordable housing in Lagos, Nigeria.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
All right, then a quick update from the world of space programs. Let's focus on China's lunar program. It's launched the Chang'e 4 lunar mission that makes humankind's first ever attempt to land on the far side of the moon. Now the far side, also the dark side if you can call it that, effectively faces away from us here on this little rock called Earth. It remains comparatively unknown, hasn't been fully explored, with a different composition from the sites on the near side where previous missions have landed. Now the aim of this particular probe is to drop a lander and a rover into the moon's vast and unexplored South Pole Aitken Basin. The rover is expected to reach its destination in about 2 weeks. It's going to pick up the work started by the lunar rover of the Chang'e 3 mission that landed on the moon back in December 2013. We'll keep you updated on exactly how that plays out a little later. Let's turn our attention now to South Africa, where an art curator and designer, Lunga Khumalo, uses wooden pallets to create some fairly interesting furniture. As CGTN's Ulishan Jamela now reports, his firm produces modern home and office furniture out of wood everyone else discards.
Lunga Khumalo produces stylish wood furniture, baby cots, coffee tables and closets amongst other items. His business started as a sustainable development project using environmentally friendly wooden pallets.
Another thing that made me to use pallet wood is the fact that pallet wood in most cases are used for industrial uses. And once these industrial areas, they throw them away, they throw them away and it becomes a global problem, where it is my role as a designer to solve that problem, of waste, seeing waste gathering around everywhere. So yeah, we go around, we gather these fine woods, then we turn them into lifestyle furniture. Yeah, another thing, it also forms part of the Sustainable Development Program, where we use found materials to produce new things.
The name of his company is Sefate Reimagined. Sefate is a Sesotho language word meaning tree. He says this is because he's passionate about environment-related issues.
We should take care of nature, although nature takes care of itself, but it's also our duty, to make sure that we live in an environmentally friendly environment. A dead tree today may bring birth to a new furniture tomorrow. Yeah, that's why I enjoy working with pallet wood.
Khumalo also uses other material to beautify his crafts.
Yeah, the piece I'm working on now is a coffee table. It's a pallet wood coffee table. The materials we use there is your screws, glue, varnish, as you can see behind, as my colleague is busy varnishing it. Yeah, it's a coffee table, uniquely designed for home use, where to beautify your home.
The designer also started his company with the aim to open employment opportunities for young people in his township.
I'm really passionate about job creation, creating employment for young people. Because if you could take a look around, most of our young people, they roam around the streets. We started this business as our way, of giving back to the community.
Since opening the doors of his company this year, he has managed to create employment for a number of people.
My mindset is different now. I used to be quite troublesome. Now I can even dream of achieving just like Lunga. I want to help others as well.
His goal and wish now is to become one of the country's biggest furniture producers and exporters. Like all small and upcoming companies, Khumalo's has faced challenges that have hindered him from early on, but his determination helps him to soldier on. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Soweto, South Africa.
Renting an apartment or house in Nigeria's commercial capital of Lagos is no easy task, and frankly that is a huge understatement. Housing supply is way below demand, and for most of the city's over 20 million residents, sky-high house prices and rents place affordable housing right out of their reach. As CGTN's Deji Badmus now reports, though, for one startup, that represents a huge business opportunity.
If there's one city that holds so much attraction to majority of Nigerians, it's Lagos, the country's commercial capital. With a population of over 20 million and counting, and a housing deficit of around 3 million, renting a decent house in this city is quite expensive. Any intending tenant must be willing to pay at least a year's rent in advance. And that is where Tunde Balogun and his startup Rent Small come in. His 2-month-old real estate firm partners homeowners and connects them to prospective tenants seeking affordable rent, and a deal could be struck in just 48 hours.
So with Rent Small, you don't really have to, you don't pay upfront. You pay either monthly, quarterly, biannually, based on what is convenient for you. And also we have insurance, first of its kind, which is also an incentive. It's a benefit both to the landlord and the tenant, because the landlord that is questioning, oh, why should I offer my property on Rent Small, then we're providing insurance because of the default rate that is quite high in Nigeria, in Lagos. And then other side of it also is that a tenant who has a secure job, or who for whatever reason loses their job or have accidents while they're staying at the property, or death, then the insurance also cover such tenants.
Now, Rent Small is leveraging on technology to make this as easy as possible for intending tenants. So, intending tenants only need to go to the website of Rent Small. There you have the property displayed. So, you just make your choice, fill a form, send to Rent Small, and then Rent Small goes through your form, looks at what you need, and it gets back. After that, the payment is arranged, and that's it.
One of the things we look out for is the your income to rent ratio. We want to know if you're earning 200,000 per month, you shouldn't be renting a property of 180,000, 150,000 per month, it's not sustainable. So we want to see that you can actually afford that. And so we check that through your bank statement, and we look at for what your salary is. Guarantor is another thing that we make sure that your guarantor can stand for you. And then the last thing I think is also your previous tenancy record.
In just 2 months of operation, Rent Small clients have reached double digits.